Right, so we've got Digby to this stage now, and this is just to give me an idea of the ears, so I'll take those off. It's quite bald without them. So I've done quite a bit of the patching, and when you do the patching, extend it down to below that seam on the base, because later you're going to put your base on there, which will be some sort of cardboard covered in a fabric. So go all the way round. Done the head, smaller patches on the head because it's more curved. I've got to find a better fabric here, this seems to be a bit too bright. When you come to do this section, bear in mind you're going to put your leg over top of there anyway, so you don't have to be too critical about this area, but you do have to do the underneath because that will show, and in some ways it's just as well to do the whole lot, but don't use your special fabric on that bit. And then we're going to fit the front legs. Probably best to do the front legs first, so then at least he will stand up for when you're doing the back leg that's slightly at that angle. So with the front legs, obviously determine how long you want them. That's entirely up to you. And then fill them up to the point where it's going to be quite an abrupt stop. So a bit more in there actually. In fact, this one's filled a bit better because that is going to be quite an abrupt stop there, and then fitted to butt up to the actual body itself. So what I did was fill it to, so it's really, really stuffed and rigid, and then fold that down so you can see there's quite an abrupt stop there, and put a couple of stitches in there so that doesn't come undone, and then fit that to the body in the position that you want. I mean, you might want it at an angle or flat, and obviously all you're doing, choose your position, pin it in place, and you've got that wire to stitch around, so it's going to be a nice strong fit in there. But just make sure you've got your position right and that is nice and tightly butted up. You can actually put a couple of patches over top there to cover the join, which is what I did with Digby anyway. And then you've got the other one that's going to go here. Again, nice firm abrupt stop there so that it will butt up as well as possible to the dog. So I'll do these two and then I'll get back to you to show you how I fitted those, and then it will be the back leg. So I've done the two front legs now, and I'll show you how they are stitched on. Strong thread all the way around the wire. Don't go too far up the body because obviously when the base is put on that might be seen, so just keep it within the base itself. And that stitch in there is where I've done the top of the paw to bring it down so it's nice and tight so it doesn't move when you're actually stitching. You need lots and lots of pins to hold it in place for when you turn it upside down and stitch that wire in. And then for the back leg, I would suggest you put the heel down fairly well sort of on the floor. This section, which has got the wire in it, is fairly low on a dog actually. It comes down quite low, that leg part. And then for the tail, you've got the wire in there as well, which I've trimmed back, and that just obviously stops up around about there. And then put a line of pins on the under section. Then you can tack that in place once you're happy with it. It does, you don't have to fiddle around with it. So tack that in place, and that can be trimmed off, and then you can start to stuff this so that it's got a nice transition onto the body. I'll go and do that for you now. Oh, and the other thing is to underneath this part, let's say the heel, that's just got to be attached to the body slightly, so a couple of stitches there to hold it in place. So the under part now has had a bit of a trim. I've tacked it along there to keep it in place and to keep the wire in place at that end and at this end, so that's all tacked in place. And then you pull this bit over and you're going to put the wadding in. This actually isn't the best wadding because it's been used several times, so it's gone a bit lumpy, but some nice soft wadding. Put that in so that you get that smooth finish to the body, and then once you pin and tack that in place, then you can trim this back and then put your patches over top of the edge, and maybe down the front bit or over this section here where it curves, a patch over top of the join there. Yeah, so the important thing is though is to make it look like it's part of the body and not sort of plonked on top. So this area is quite crucial, and then you'd need to stitch under here so that it's close to the body and you haven't got that gap when you look through under here, although the other paw will be coming out here as well. So I hope that's clear enough. So pin and tack the underlayer, trim that back, pin and tack the wires in place so you've got it really secure at the tail end and then under this section here. Tack the heel, if you like, to the underbody so that gap is closed, and then fill the stuffing softly, gently until you're happy with it and how it will go to the body itself. I mean, there's a bit more I can do to that to make it nice and smooth, but then tack that on, trim it back, and then put your patches over top. I think the back leg is finished now. I've put a couple of patches over the seams or where it's joined and even brought it down a little bit. And then over the back area I've put more patches so that you can't see the join. But while I'm at this stage, I was going to show you how I do the nose. Maybe zoom in a little bit. This is the pattern for the nose. It's fairly straightforward. The straight edge, this is more curved at the bottom, I've put over the top and pin that in place. Again, it's a case of playing and making sure that it's what you want. So then you've got this flappy bit here, and what I do is pull that down tight either side and put a pin in to keep that in place. And then this excess bit I sort of spread out so that it kind of looks like the edges of his nostril. I don't know if you can see that. Let me see if I can put a pin in, and I'm sure you'll find your own way of doing it anyway, or some people will probably just buy a nose. See what I mean? That fabric's shedding everywhere. But once that's stitched in place, it's obviously it fits quite snug over the top. Bring it down here, stitch it all around, and then that excess bit, if you spread it either side, it's not very easy to see in the black, but it makes it look like it's got some definition for his nostrils. It's quite an easy way, and that's just a piece of black felt. As I say, I'm sure you'll find your own ways, but once that's stitched in place, that will look neater, obviously. Now when we're thinking about this, the last paw that goes just underneath his body, I've got the wires in there just to this base, paw base here. I can just feel them under there now. It does need to be started, but not that much, because it's only going to be kind of sticking out a little bit at an angle, and kind of going underneath there, and you're going to have to decide where you think it looks best. I mean, sometimes when my dog's sitting like that, you don't even see the extra paw, and maybe it doesn't need it, I don't know, but I've done it so that you've got it there, and then you can decide. But it's going to be like that, so the wire's in it, so on the underside, pin that in place so you can feel the wires through there, lots of pins, then stitch it in place through the wire and onto the base itself, and then that will be covered up with a piece of card later. So I can actually go and do that now. I fitted the fourth leg now, so that's really secure with the wire as well, right up underneath the body, and it's obviously at that sort of angle because he's laying on it. I've also done some paw marks on this one so far, and that I'll do on all four paws. And you may notice, but I've actually decided to, I used a black thread and I think it needs livening up a bit, so I'm doing the stitching again. I'm unpicking one as I go, and then I'm carrying on with the lighter colour thread because I think it'll just lift it up a little. Now for this dog I'm going to have stand-up ears, so I've done 2 fronts and 2 backs, and with the front just cinch it in a little bit so that'll make it a bit more shaped. In fact, actually I think we can put some wadding, a little bit of wadding behind there before we fit it. So once you've done that, I'll do that on that one as well, which will have to go that way to be opposite to that. Then we put the the front and back together and stitch up and down, because by doing that, that will mean that the back of the ear will just come round a little bit, so there'll be a bit of shape on it. And then we will be putting wire in there so they remain upright. Okay, so just stitch that a little bit there and then put that one onto there. So there's the ear with the stitched together, right sides out, so you've got this sort of edge to it. And insert the wire as far as you can up into the point, and then just lightly stuff, because you have got this hollow here to fill. And you'll do that to however you prefer. And of course the size is for you to determine. It's oversized, so you can trim that down as you prefer. And the next thing is to stitch that to the head. I've done a bit of work on the ears now, I just hope you can see that okay. These are actually pinned in place but not sewn, so what I thought to do is kind of in reverse, because this is how I would like them to be, but there's a lot of fiddling around and getting the angles right to actually fit it, so I thought I'd just show you how I've done it from this point of view to undoing it. So that's the back, it's all sort of pinned in place, and those will be my patches to go over top of the edges of the ears. And if I just take that off, you'll see what I've done. So I've put a light bit of wadding inside there, and slightly and a pleat there, which obviously is covered up with a patch. The wire is still in there because you need that to keep them pricked up, and I've just put all the pins round to hold it in place. Now I'm going to sew that on, and I'm quite happy with how that looks. There's from the side view, front, and then the other side. And I have trimmed off a bit of the ear So it's up to you how much you want to trim off. And on the front section, that is just sort of tucked in, because there's the waddings in there as well. So just stitch it along the back, so it's nice and firmly in place, and I can feel the wire underneath there, so I'll do a few stitches over that wire to keep that in place, because you might want to change it and have one ear up and one ear down and change it around, but make sure that's nice and firmly stitched in place, and along here as well, the other side of the wire. And then you could just go on the inside with your curved needle. I've actually used a curved needle quite a lot on this one, so that would be really useful to go inside there. I think I showed you, yes I did, the patching on the ears, and you could do this the other way. You could actually put the two together and then turn it inside out so you don't have the rough edge, but I just thought it would look nice with the rough edge. And incidentally, this fabric, I said the other one was fraying a lot and was shedding all over the animal, so I found this which is actually curtain lining, but it was a little bit too bright, so I just put an old tea bag in some water and dunked a little bit in there for a while, a very short while, just to give it a very, very slight bit of colour, and that I think looks quite a lot better. I'm going to stitch these on now and then put my patches over top of the raw edge at sort of random, possibly like that, and then I think the next job will be to do the tail. I'm going to do a few little highlights of lighter fabric over this, just to lift it up a little bit, some bit more of this cream. Certainly I know on the front paws I will, because that will follow the how my sister's dog was. And I've got to sort out the eyes. They will be very similar to that, and I'm going to have a go at well, I'm not quite sure. Oh, and I've stitched the nose on now, so that's all finished. I doubt you'll be able to see it very well, but it just, with that slight, it just gives a little bit of definition to that sort of the nostril area. I'm just working on the tail now, so I've just done this, you know, freehand. There's no pattern for the tail because there's so many different types, and hopefully they should be fairly straightforward anyway. Although I say that, I've put one pattern which is actually on Digby Dog, which is the like a Cocker Spaniel, but it is a docked tail, so it's not like the full tail. So this one is just that shape. I've cut it out. I've stitched a piece of lighter fabric that goes with his chest and his ears, and I've already zigzagged that onto the end before I did the seam allowance. So I managed to turn the tail through eventually. I won't say it was easy, but so don't make that point too sharp, because you'll never get it through, especially if you put a piece of fabric on there like that. So then I'm going to use a bit of electrical wire on this one, because I want it to maybe curl around one way or another way. You won't be able to curl it too much though, because I've done this straight anyway, and if you do try and curl it too much once it's stuffed, it's going to wrinkle up. So it's going to be flexible, but not too flexible. I'm just going to have it running around like that, I think. So I'm going to stuff that and stitch that on his bottom. That's the tail fitted, and all I've done is stitch it to the back end, and then I've put a couple of patches over them, and if you do it neat enough you may not even need to do that, but I've just put that in to blended in a bit better. Now we're going to do the base. For the base I'm using, well actually it's part of a office file, but it's quite a nice thickness and I can sew through it okay, so that will act perfectly alright for the base. I usually use like a Weetabix or cornflake packet, but I haven't actually got any big enough, so it needs to be something that you can sew through easily, so don't have anything that's going to be too hard. That is very easy to sew through, so because it's going to be sewn to the base with a fabric on it as well. This will be covered with a fabric. You don't want to have anything that you can't get your needle through. Now, just as a guide, just draw around, obviously not where the legs are, as best you can. And you'll be trimming it anyway, so because you're going to perhaps be a little bit oversized. So what we've got there, interesting. That's where his leg is, his under leg. And there's his front two legs. So I would cut round that, slightly oversized, maybe 5mm or so. Put it, well, let's do that first. I'll cut that off for you. So I've cut that out now according to our very rough drawing. And that is how it's going to go. You're going to cover it with a fabric, Hessian. I've not quite decided whether I should use Hessian, this brown fabric, or this gold one. And then stitch that through, and when you do, stitch it through and pull that side down all the way around, and obviously round the front by the paws, and pull it down as nice and tight as possible. And you'll see actually this is much smaller than the base that you cut out initially, and that's because where we've put the patches on and we've pulled it round, and obviously the patches come over that sort of seam line as well, so that's why it's less, it's much smaller than the actual base pattern piece that you used. But that's the principle. What you'd need to do now is to stick your fabric onto that base, whether you use glue, spray glue, whatever it may be to put on there. Make sure though that you've got the right face. That's the face of mine, so that's where I want to stick my fabric, onto this side. Don't stick it onto the underside. So just, you could use double-sided tape, you can use a sellotape sort of backed on itself so that it keeps it in place. Then fold it round and or trim it, fold it round and glue into or sellotape into place. I'll show you mine when I've done it anyway. I'm actually going to use this card doubled because I've got another one that I can cut out. In fact, look, that's the size of the original base that you've used, so it's shrunk down quite considerably. So I'm going to use these two stuck together to make it a little bit stiffer, and then cover it in my fabric and stitch it onto the base. I just wanted to show you here, I've used masking tape just to sellotape them or tape them down, but beware because it will make it more difficult for your needle to go through. But if that's all you've got, then do it. I've just used a spray glue and I always get into a terrible mess. It goes everywhere, but it won't affect my my needle. So I'm going to carry on and use the glue and get into a mess. You could use sellotape, which may be easier on your needle going through. But just be careful, whatever you choose, that you don't end up with it making it hard work for yourself to put your needle through to sew this onto the base. I suppose you could actually just tack it round first and then do your stitching and then just remove your tacking. That would work as well. See, I get into an awful mess, but never mind. Okay, so that, I've done that double thickness by the way, so that's ready to be stitched onto the base now. But wherever possible, try and use something you've got at home. Don't go out and buy anything. It's you know, this is a project where we're trying to use up things if we can. I like to hear where people have spent very, very little for their projects. The eyes for me being the most expensive, though I really would like to try and sew some, and some of you ladies that are good at that sort of thing, I'm be interested to see how you do it. Anyway, next project then is to, or next process is to sew on the base, and all we're going to be doing is I pin it in place first of all, and I don't know if you've noticed there's more of a curve there on his front side. Pin it in place as best I can, and then all we're going to do is to do a nice stitch all the way around with a strong thread, and as you do, sort of put a bit of pressure on to pull the sides down so that it meets the base nicely. And this is the base fitted on now, so just stitched all the way round to keep it all in place nicely. For the eyes on this one, and there's various different ways that you can do the eyes, I've cut out a piece of the grey fabric which is from the muzzle, and I've kind of darkened it down a little bit with a felt tip pen. Then I've got a white piece of fabric that I've glue gunned to this grey fabric, and then I've glue gunned these eyes to the white. Then I'm going to just use the glue gun, or even a Pritt stick actually, just to put them in place. So there, in fact, actually yes, I'll use the Pritt stick because that will be easier in case I want to move them. And then I will just stitch with small stitches around the outside. So let me do that. Yes, I would say Pritt stick is a good way of positioning it so that you're then happy with it. Otherwise, if you use the glue gun, once it's on there, it's pretty much finished. So Pritt stick, and then I'm just going to sew very neatly around the outside. And there we go, we have our completed Digby Scrappy dog. And I think he's going to look really nice on the hearth. Hope you really enjoy making yours, and look forward to all the different combinations of Digby Scrappy dog. Here we have another ear choice for you, which is a floppy ear, a bit like a dachshund I suppose. So I wanted just to go through it with you. The ear size in the pattern is this one, but I have turned it through. So with a 10mm seam allowance, it obviously works out a bit smaller. So it's entirely up to you. If you want to have the seams exposed, then the ear would be 10mm bigger. But I thought because of this one, I didn't want it to be exposed seams. It was fine on brown on the Boddington. And this has got wire inside. So what you do, cut out 2 pieces of, well, 4 in total, depending on which colour you want. So this side has got the green on both sides, and this one is the pink. And I've appliqued a flower on there. Not sure I completely like it, but anyway, it may or may not stay. but I piqued that on before I joined the two right sides together and turned it through, and then we've got wire in here which extends all the way around the outside, and to begin with you need to pin it so that you can get the nice shape to it, and then we need to fit that on the ear, on the head. So you need to cut out your piece of wire, extend it up to the top here. You're going to be trimming that back anyway, but it's best to start with a full length, makes it easier anyway. So insert the wire like I have here and just make sure it gets to the edge, and to begin with it's probably a good idea to pin it in place until it forms its the shape. This is again is electrical wire that I'm using. My son's an electrician, and it's very good for this because it's quite easily to mould. So once you've got it down to the bottom, just pin it into place, and then it will stick to the outside and give you that shape. Now this is just cotton fabric. If you wanted something a bit heavier, you could, when you stitch your two together, you could put something else on the inside as well, like a lining, which would give it a little bit more substance. But I'm going to see how this goes first, and then try and get it to go up into that bit, because that's where we're going to shape it and maybe fit to the body. So that's our pair of ears, and now we have to attach it to the head. First of all, we shall want this bit at the back to fold down slightly, and then the ear will sort of hang like that, and the wires are just underneath there, so we can pin those into place. And then just keep, like most of my patterns, there's a bit of creativity and fiddling around so that you get the right sort of shape. And from the back that will go down like that, and and you can hold that in place, and that'll be stitched in as well. So I would say I'd like to leave it like that and probably trim off that section, and then maybe put a patch over top. I'm trying to keep that sort of line of his nose coming up and over his, or her, sorry, she's a little girl. She would be with flowers, wouldn't she? So I want to try and keep that if I can. And again with this one, a little bit of fiddling around to make sure they match up, and bend that bit under, and you might want them further back, or you know, you might be wanting to copy your dog anyway, so you have to do it how it suits you. I know some people say that there should be more markings and detail, but to be honest, it's quite a creative process, so you know, we don't like to be too forthright in what you have to do. So I'm going to trim that wire back and trim the fabric, so then put a patch over top of that. But once it's in place, it's quite secure. Obviously in front of the camera I can't quite see if that's even, but it's that sort of thing. That one's a bit longer anyway, so I shall adjust that. I'll do that now, sew them in place, and then show you how I've patched over. When you do this, try and catch the wire as well so that it's nice and firm, even if it's just for sort of half an inch or an inch. What you don't really want, if you can avoid it, is having the wire coming too far over, because then when you do a patch over, you will you'll get a little ridge there, so try to avoid that. But that one's looking nice, so I've got to fiddle with that one there, but that's the sort of thing. And then from the side and from the back, and we'll put a few stitches there just to hold that in place. I don't think this type of ear you would be wanting to move around, but you possibly could do anyway. So I've put the ears on now, sewn them in place, so going over that little piece of wire there, along the seam, just trim it, fold it under and stitch that back, and then down this part of the wire, and again on the other side. So they're quite firm now. And that's the view from the back. This one, I think I told you earlier or mentioned that if you wanted a slimmer leg, just sew the seam slightly smaller. So I'm talking about this seam over the top here. If you adjust it round here, then you've got to have the paw pad adjusted the same, so that gets a bit more complicated. But just by going slightly lower at the top there, so instead of on that section there doing a 10mm, if you go 15-20mm, it reduces the height and makes it for a thinner paw, which is what I wanted for this particular one. And I'd just like to show you the other ear. There's three types of ear. There's this one, which is the DIGBY, then we've got the stand-up ear, and then the one I've just shown you on the colourful one. It's like a sort of floppy ear. So all I've done here is I've got three layers of black felt, appliqued, stitched on some scraps to go inside with the body itself, and then I've just sort of cut around the outside to make it look a bit raggedy. Their dog always had raggedy ears. And that's the other one, and there's another pin. So that's what he looks like from the front as well. So there's a choice there, and obviously there's a lot more different choices of ears, and indeed the tail. This one's like a roly dog with short tail, and he was docked, but yeah, there's plenty of other types of tails that will define your breed of dog.